What is up, Ada Nation? Welcome to Dap Central. My name is Fareed. I want to first and foremost thank all the viewers for tuning in as a part of today's live stream. Now, today I'm going to be joined with a special guest making his first appearance here on the YouTube channel. This person has contributed greatly to the space, has been around since I believe around 2017, but I'm not going to tell their story for them. I'll give them an opportunity to introduce themselves. And so without any further ado, I want to go ahead and bring up Chris O onto the show. Chris, good morning. How are you doing? Happy to have you here.
Good morning. Delighted to be here as well. Thank you for the invitation. It's a exciting time.
Yeah, thank you for, again, giving me a part of your time. As a part of today's video, we're going to be chatting about layer 2 and scaling solutions, not only within Cardano, but how the layer 2 scaling solutions have been implemented on Ethereum and some of the positives and negatives. But before we jump into all of that, do you mind potentially just introducing yourself to the audience here, how you came into Cardano and what your current skill sets are and what your contributions have been into the space?
Yeah, absolutely. Talking about myself is one of my least favorite things to do, but been part of the community since 2017. I think like a lot of the community members, it all started with Charles's TED Talks. After doing the deep dive and doing the research and reading all the research papers and following the project and the builders closely, it made absolute sense and made perfect sense to me that it was, the evolution or the extension of the original, crypto, Bitcoin, and Satoshi's vision. And to me, in my mind at the time, it seemed like a absolutely intuitive and natural evolution and progression from Bitcoin, which I've been in since 2000, was it 2010, 2010. For me, watching the space grow, it's been exciting. Watching Cardano and the ecosystem grow has been tremendously exciting. And I think the main thing that drew me to the project is I actually come from a bioscience, biomedical, pharmaceutical sciences background, drug design. That's what my training is in, at least in a past life, whatnot. And so the slow, intentional, deliberate, research-based design and testing that is also part of that industry made perfect sense to me when you're trying to build, the next global digital economy where you're trying to give people financial freedom and self-sovereign identity. And it's not something that you can rush. You're not making an iPhone, you're not making the next widget where you can do the quote unquote move fast and break things. You're making critical infrastructure. You're making, the equivalent of an aeroplane. And so you want people to be intentional, deliberate, and patient in their rollout of the designs, and that there's quality backtesting, quality QA, QC. Most recently, uh, what I've been spending my time is, and I've been working with the Summon platform folks, fantastic team, Riley, Adam, and the rest. And we're constructing a community, I guess, funded DAO with the intention that it becomes, in essence, a parallel to Catalyst a little bit. And in a sense, is a resource to give grants to projects that are finding it hard to self-sustain financially and need resources, especially when we're in a bear market or slower times, and kind of assist in that fashion. We're very much still in the build-out phase, but it is something I think that is needed in the community. Speaking to a couple of builders, another avenue to pull resources and finances from so that they can continue to build a project, because a lot of projects are bootstrapping right now, is a welcome addition to the ecosystem. So we're excited to pursue that, and I'm excited to kind of focus on that for the time being.
Sounds to me like you are plugged into all the different facets and corners of the Cardano ecosystem. And there's just so many different things that are going to be coming about that I'm sure that you also have your hands into with respect to governance and everything like that. But thank you for the wonderful introduction, Chris. For anybody who's not already following you on Twitter, I did go ahead and leave the link to your official Twitter page down below as a part of today's description. And one of the things that I find that you really bring to this space is going to be um, a very level headed mindset as well a very fact-based approach, which I think really jives with my approach here on this YouTube channel. So again, I want to thank you for your time, and I'm excited for this particular collaboration and what could come in future collaborations. Now, the main focus and the main topic of today's video or today's live stream will be to touch on layer 2 scaling solutions within Cardano and some recent issues that you've noticed within the Ethereum space as well. And so
Yeah.
we're going to kick things off with just an introduction to what layer 2 scaling solutions are for anybody who's not familiar with them. And we're going to also talk about two sides of the layer 2 scaling solutions, right? The first is going to be a positive relationship where there is beneficial or where there's positives for the L1 as well as the L2. And then more of a parasitic look as well, where there is not necessarily a trade off for the L1 by implementing layer 2 scaling solutions. Now, there's a lot of information, and I guess let's just jump right on in, right? So, first things first, do you mind briefly explaining in your own two words, what is a layer 2 scaling solution and some of the potential benefits that you've seen and noticed within the crypto space as it pertains to those things?
Yeah, absolutely. So, a layer two or a side chain model, um, it's very much it's one option when you're looking at how you can scale and how you can increase, and I'll put it in layman's term, the capacity or the value proposition of the base chain. So the way I look at it is you have a base chain like Cardano. It's secure, it's decentralized, it's written in a language, and its security properties are fantastic. There's 3,000 plus stake pool operators. There's 63% delegation. The network's secure, and we've decided to make some trade-offs. The trade-offs are we're scaling within set parameters on the base layer because of the requirements of the decentralization, the requirements of security, and we are trying to do this so that in another part of the world, someone in sub-Saharan Africa or someone in Southeast Asia who may be living on $100 a month is able to at least acquire a Raspberry Pi, set up a node, and participate in securing the network, participate in governance, and they're not going to have the resources to buy a supercomputer and participate in a chain with the ultra fast TPS, but because of the hardware requirements, they're excluded from participating in the consensus of the protocol. So what Cardano has done and decided to do strategically, and it's a great option, is we've in fact decided to actually do all the options. We're optimizing the base layer. We're improving the Pluto script. We're doing pipelining. Later on down the line, input endorsers. That's all scaling options on the base layer. In addition, in parallel to that, for L2, we have Hydra, and then the continued evolution of Hydra, where eventually we're moving to a point where there's virtual Hydra heads interacting and transacting with each other off chain. And then at the same time, we have all these different side chains with their unique properties, their unique use cases. They can have their own different various consensus protocols. They have different ledger rules. They can have different languages. They can have different purposes. So something like Midnight, which will be kind of IOG's uh, zero knowledge proof kind of chain, its whole purpose is to prevent financial fraud, manipulation in a transaction, and crime, whilst also at the same time providing secure and confidential transactions that are also compliant with, say, local and governmental regulations. And so, say, think of World Mobile and their side chain. in that kind of environment where they have very stringent compliance rules for their industry, they're able to use Midnight or an equivalent and still be able to use Cardano as the base layer for the consensus of their chain at the end of the day. There's so much we could go into, but let's I'll give you back the mic.
No, I appreciate you bringing a different perspective to this channel. I always like to tell my guests when they come on, if they're other content creators or just space contributors like this, I do a lot of speaking in all of my regular day-to-day videos, and I love the different perspective and the interaction that we get, not only with you, but also with the community here. So feel free to, drop as much knowledge as you deem fit on this. And as I said earlier, I'm also learning along the way. So thank you for that. Now, the next thing I want to do, or I do want to jump into, just going to be a brief clip that you actually brought to my attention, which was released by Charles Hoskinson, which if you guys are not already following him on his own YouTube channel, I definitely recommend you guys go ahead and do so. Charles is really great at explaining things. And this was one of the things that you pointed out to me that's been really helpful. So I want to go ahead and just bring this up here for the viewers. It's about a minute to a minute and a half long, and we're just going to play this here, and then we're going to kind of reflect on it once it's done. So let's go ahead and just quickly do that. And then Chris, I want to get your thoughts as to some of the positives that we're going to get with scaling on Cardano, and then we're going to jump into what you noticed within Ethereum.
Yeah.
More efficient. Mithril 2.0. Mithril's already amazing, and we can really get a lot more. Mithril is actually going to be an essential component on input endorsers, and I'll explain that in a little bit. There's a lot of cool things that we're pushing into on the more complicated snark systems, the recursion and roll-up side of the world. That'll be real cool in November to kind of showcase all of that. This actually is also connected to the sidechains agenda. So sidechains, what this does is gives fast finality. This gives roll-ups. So there's a connection point there. And this also gives different models of transactions and resources. Also, a lot of traffic gets driven to the side chain, which means there's less load on the main chain. So there's some things that you do to get stuff off the chain. So Hydra, for example, gets stuff off the chain. Rollups get stuff off the chain. Side chains get stuff off the chain. Optimizations is about better resource utilization while on chain. For example, Plutus 2.0 that shipped with Vossel, you'll notice a lot of the dApp developers saying, hey, we've had a 10x improvement in terms of the utilization of resources. So a script that's a kilobyte now is 100 bytes. Whoa, that's crazy. That's a 10x. That means just much more efficient utilization of the resources that we have. So there's lots of iterative optimizations that are being done on the network layer, the block structure, the authenticated data structures that are used, Plutus optimizations and other things, which gain meaningful percentages over time.
All right. Chris, what are your thoughts? I mean, I heard a few different benefits.
So a couple of things. I don't know if everyone picked it up, but just there at the very beginning in November, in reference to snarks and ZK proofs and rollups, I think there's going to be a pretty cool announcement at the summit in relation to Cardano ZK rollups. So I'm looking forward to that. I'm just purely speculating. I have no idea at all. But a couple things about moving the load off the main chain or the base chain and putting it into side chains and just taking the load off the main layer. That is very impactful and powerful. And if you're on X and you've been following Cardano's Twitter, in the last few days there's been a lot of talk about TPS and some outside researchers and observers going, oh, Cardano only really does 6 transactions per second. You can't really take into consideration extended UTXO and having multiple outputs per transaction. Well, the reality is, because a lot of how we're designing and building, first of all, that's factually incorrect. What some of these researchers have said about the TPS and pertaining to Cardano and the base layer. But I think the more important point is the design that we're going for is a parallel scaling plan where base layer is optimized, as Charles said, at that last bit of the video. Plutus scripts. There's other languages like Option and Aiken also providing versatility, providing. And if you've seen the demo of, I believe it was Sunday Swap or Mint Swap using the Aiken language, and just how much more efficient the transactions were. And then you take a lot of the rest of the load off chain into these side chains, then the whole ecosystem just is more optimized and functioning faster and quicker. The other thing about what I really love about, how we're approaching side chains and L2s in the Cardano ecosystem is that two things, like, it's going to be a multi-chain world, multi-chain ecosystem. And, in our community, there are folks that like what Algorand are doing, or they may like what Avalanche is doing on the EVM side. So Algorand is a BFT chain, right? So it's a Byzantine fault-tolerant chain, which, without getting into the whole technicalities of it, is the reason why it allows for instant finality by its design. But there are trade-offs to that. Well, the cool thing is, at the base layer, we're not a BFT, but we can have a BFT sidechain. And so Cardano can have the instant finality that, Algorand boasts. And we trade off nothing at the base layer. And so we add a capability without making a concession at our fundamental base. So that's really cool. And the same applies to EVM chains and EVM compatible chains, or any other, in fact. In a hypothetical, just like Ethereum did with Eclipse, someone could spin up a Solana virtual machine sidechain that uses Cardano as a consensus layer, and we can have that written in Rust, and people that designed dApps or built dApps for Solana could very well launch it on these sidechains. And so that's the exciting thing about it. Now, what I did want to start getting into, as we kind of caveat into Ethereum and its, what I would describe as a vampiric relationship with its L2s, is that for Cardano, if you watch the rest of Charles's video, the way Midnight, for example, is designed is that it will be using Cardano's SPOs as the validators. And so as Midnight uses Cardano and its validators for consensus and for as for using the base layer for the transactions, then Midnight, the chain, pays the SPOs the inflation from its own chain. So that's where the dust tokens come into play. So in effect, for work done, the SPOs, and by adjunct, the delegators, are paid in dust for the work done by the Cardano delegators, by the security that the Cardano ecosystem provides to Midnight in return for them being able to do the transactions that they do. So it's a two-way street. So Midnight inherits our security, inherits some of our economic activity and liquidity. In return, they pay for it with their inflation through the dust tokens and the SPOs and the staking, the Cardano stakers, in addition to ADA, get paid dust. And so that's a mutually beneficial relationship. There's a transaction there, right? Now, there are other models of sidechains economically, the economics of it, where they use the base chain, but the only kind of compensation for using the base chain is the transaction fees that are created. And so you're looking at 0.3 ADA per transaction is what Cardano would get paid, whilst, say, another sidechain reaps all the benefits of the security, the liquidity, the economic activity potentially, and so on and so on. And in return, they pay 0.3 ADA per transaction. And so I think a reasonable person would say, well, that is a very unbalanced economic relationship, because it's the ADA holder, it's the ADA delegate, SPO, that's doing all the work or investing their resources to keep Cardano secure and decentralized. And then along comes another chain, kind of inherits all of that, and in return pays 0.3 ADA. That is kind of not a very balanced relationship. And so, that is where, I would like to see, as we roll out these side chains, intentional and sensible eye in kind of deciding, is this a fair economic relationship, or is there a better option that actually benefits both parties at reasonably equal, in that case. But yep, that's my thought. The long answer to a short question.
No, again, I appreciate the insights and the thought there. It really goes to show how much time and effort you've put into understanding layer two scaling solutions and some of the potential possibilities, right? Especially with the rollout of governance, we're going to need to hear from some of the people that have been doing the groundwork and the research to better understand which direction we should go. Because again, as governance rolls out, everything will be in the community's hands to vote as to how Cardano scales and which direction we follow. Now, just to back up a little bit, you were touching on some of the key benefits, right? Number one, I heard scalability. Number two, I heard speed. Number three, cost efficiency. And then there was a mix of potential interoperability and then like a user or an enhanced user experience. So just some of the things that I'm picking up there based off of your initial comments. Now, one thing that you mentioned was that with the midnight um, uh, chain, there's going to be a win-win, right? Not only do stakers get to earn some of the dust token, the network is also able to thrive off of the underlying Cardano infrastructure. So I believe that is going to touch the mutualism portion of things, right? And this was something that I actually had to look up right before jumping on this call. So it's a plus plus. Whereas with commensalism, right, there is a plus for one party and then somewhat of a neutral for the other. And then for the parasitism, which is I think the worst case scenario, there's only one person that benefits, or there's only one piece of the chain or the L2 that benefits, whereas the underlying L1 does not benefit. So obviously we want to be where mutualism is, right? Where there's a benefit for L1 users, stakers, supporters of the core Cardano network, as well as incentive for a layer two structure to be built on top of that, that then also provides its own accessibility features, its own, unique speed and cost efficiency features as well. So now that we understand that, we've touched on Midnight, which I believe is going to be a privacy sidechain.
Mhm.
Do you maybe have any thoughts, let me see here, surrounding things like Hydra and Mithril?
Yeah, I'm very excited. So the cool thing about I'll start with Mithril and then I'll go to Hydra. But Mithril just provides all kinds of capabilities uh, to Cardano, and it facilitates a lot of things that are coming down the chute. So Mithril, it makes the chain more secure, it makes it faster, and then it allows for new different capabilities. It makes it more robust of a chain. So to use like an example or an analogy, it's through Mithril that we can potentially have like a light client node that you'd be able to put on your smartphone, right? And so why that is powerful again, when we look at what is the mission of Cardano, is to bank the unbanked, right? Give self-sovereign identity to especially the folks that self-sovereignty or identity has been taken from. You look at places in the world, like again, sub-Saharan Africa, Central Asia, Southeast Asia, Latin America portions of it. And you have to look at the economic reality of the folks in those countries. And the reality is most people, are barely able to survive in a highly inflationary environment. And so realistically, what kind of technology are they going to have with them, if anything? And the most likely thing, that the highest level capability that they'll have with technology, is their smartphone to some degree. It might not be the latest iPhone, for example, but they'll have a smartphone of some kind. Um, and that's a reasonable expectation, presumption. Again, in a past life, I was in the military service and I was in, Afghanistan and all those places. And I will say that, the funny, strange thing about living in 2023 and 2000s and all of that is you'll go to the most isolated place in the world, where there's deserts and it looks very primal and primitive. People are still living in mud buildings, but they will still have a smartphone and they will still have some kind of connectivity. And so I circle back to that because imagine now Mithril, you're able to have a Cardano light node on the smartphone. Well, then theoretically they are able to participate in this protocol. They are able to use the node. They're able to send funds and receive funds, and they're able to have a DID that is not tied to whatever warlord or despot they happen to live under. And I think that's powerful. But in addition to that, uh, because of having a light client node, is you can spin up a node a lot quicker. It speeds up transactions, and it allows for like ZK APIs and ZK plugins, where that's where rollups, to Charles's point when we played that video, allows for ZK rollups to become a reality on Cardano. So that's where on the Mithril side I'm excited about. For Hydra, it's very much like the Lightning network in Bitcoin, but I think a vastly improved iteration, far more secure. And so again, it takes all the load off the base layer. It does the transactions off chain. In the future versions, there'll be multiple Hydra heads that kind of interact with each other off chain, and then the transactions are recorded back on the base layer on the other side of that transaction. And again, the main thing is it is nearly instant finality. Hydra being an isomorphic state channel chain. Instant finality, it speeds things up immensely. And so something like Hydra Pay, you could use for micropayments, and it'll be lightning quick. It'll be like instantaneous. You'll be able to send funds from one point to another. I believe Sunday Swap is implementing it as part of their features on their DEX, and I'm excited to see the capabilities and the increased performance that will bring. And so those are other so Hydra being L2, that's another L2 optimization or scaling option in addition to the sidechain conversation that we're having. And the cool thing is we're not even talking about input endorses, future versions of Plutus, changing the block size, all that is parallel conversations. And so the powerful thing about Cardano scaling is there's 3 different routes being pursued all at the same time, each giving multiples of performance to the system, and then you aggregate that all together, and that's where you get that million TPS that everyone talks about, for example.
Really, really great summarization. And for a brief recap there, the 3 facets, right? Number 1, side chains, which we've touched on, including things like Midnight, Hydra, like you just mentioned, and then very lastly, Mithril as well. So thank you for that. We've touched on, I think, what we're doing here in Cardano. Let's kind of pivot gears and jump into some of the activity that you've noticed on other networks, which have kind of given you a sense of direction as to how things should be implemented here on the Cardano network. So as an example, I'm going to pull up here the Ethereum ecosystem, and we're going to take a look at their layer 2 scaling solutions right now. And for the viewers, as you guys can see there's quite a bit going on, right? So many different pieces of the puzzle here. We've got rollups, we've got plasma, which I'm actually not too familiar with. So I'd love to kind of hear if you have a better understanding of what that is, Chris. We've got state channels, right, which we just kind of touched on. Hydra being that state channel for Cardano. We've got side chains, which we've also discussed. And then we've got hybrid solutions, and then Validium. Now, I say all that to say there's like 15 to 20 plus different layer 2 scaling solutions here, which I think at a glance looks really great if you're coming from the outside in. But as this particular article actually breaks down, there's going to be 3 key challenges that I want to discuss. So I'll kind of let you speak about, what you've noticed so far with respect to this. And then let's jump into some of the issues, which I think number 1 will be, let's see here, limited composability. Anything you want to add so far?
Yeah, absolutely. So just on the broad overview, the main thing is I'm one of those folks, if I see someone touch a hot stove, I don't need to go touch the hot stove to find out that it's hot and it's going to hurt you. And so I'm a big proponent of, I love history going through my entire education. So the point being is that learning from lessons of the past, learning from people that have done it before, taking those lessons and implementing it into your situation without having to make the same errors is the optimal path forward. And so Ethereum, has is a cycle ahead of us in most ways. That's not to say good, bad, or indifferent, but they've had to trailblaze much of the concepts that we're kind of following in trace, and maybe doing a better iteration of it, because we've been fortunate to observe someone else do it first. And so I will always be thankful and appreciative, and will acknowledge the innovation and the kind of trailblazing that the Ethereum community and builders have done. They've made good decisions, they've made bad decisions, and it's given the rest of us an opportunity to learn from it, and make, in our estimation, make a better decision. And so we start there. So with limited composability, what that drawdown or downside on some of the Ethereum sidechain model is, say, take it at the base layer. You have, say, different DeFi protocols. You'll have, say, Aave, you'll have Uniswap, you'll have 1inch, and just say, in a hypothetical, they're all operating at the base layer. Well, you can use, in one transaction, through these different DeFi protocols talking to each other, you can construct a transaction that utilizes everything, and then you have the desired outcome on the other side. So to use an example, and I'm sure a lot of us have used MetaMask, and directly on MetaMask, I might deposit some USDT or USDC, right? And then I might decide I want to buy an ERC20 token. I want to buy, let's see, I want to buy BAT. We'll go, back to 2018. I want to go buy BAT. And so I'm going to go in my MetaMask, and I'm going to go swap 20 USDC for the equivalent amount in BAT. And the great thing about MetaMask and the wallet is, then 1inch will pop up and go, we're searching all the protocols to find the best price. And then it will go, best price for this pair right now is on Uniswap. Just because of the liquidity issues, the bid to ask pricing, some markets are more liquid at different points in time in the day. And so at that point in time in the day, Uniswap had the best price. I get the most BAT for my USDC using Uniswap. So then it will take me to Uniswap. I'll connect with my wallet to Uniswap, and I'll make the transaction. And then those funds are deposited back into my MetaMask, and then I can move it to another cold wallet after that. And I will say, while I have the opportunity, for everyone's security and why people's wallets get drained, have a hot wallet that's a wallet that interacts with dApps, and then have a cold wallet that has no plugins or connections to dApps. And that is where you store your resources. Do not store your resources on the hot wallet. That is where most people get into trouble. That's where wallets get drained. So again, just best practices. You need multiple wallets. In addition to your Ledger or your Trezor or whatever you use. Anyway, so back to the point of limited composability. So that scenario I just described to you, you can't do on an L2 if that specific L2 doesn't have all those DeFi protocols. So if you have only on this L2, a notional L2 Uniswap, and on a different L2, there's a 1inch clone, then unfortunately, if you connect your MetaMask to that L2 and you look to do that swap, the 1inch DeFi protocol on a different L2 is not going to be able to speak to your wallet on the other L2 to find you the best price on another L2. So in essence, all these different L2s and the protocols are siloed, and they're not able to speak to each other. So you don't have the ability to build a transaction with multiple platforms, protocols that may not be all on the same chain. So that's what, in essence, limited composability means. And that's one of the drawdowns right now. The issue is, to go around, and the fix for that is to have bridges between L2s. And as we've seen with all the hacks and the billions and billions of dollars that get stolen, it seems nearly every week in the EVM world, most of the time it's because of bridges. Bridges are inherently not secure. And Vitalik himself has said, we have to kind of stay away from bridges. It's nigh impossible to secure or make it unhackable. And so bridges are intrinsically unsecure, I think the word is, and to have the need to do that, to have that composability, brings a weakness into the system.
Thank you. Thank you. So, as I understand it, when it comes to composability, right, the main issue with that is on the layer two, you may have, for example, DeFi protocols, DEXs, and other sorts of platforms that, function on that layer two. But if that layer two is not able to speak to other layer twos, then you're kind of in your own bubble, right? As you mentioned, the word siloed, to where, for example, right now there's been a lot of talks about DEX aggregators on Cardano, which obviously that's on the main L1, where you're
Yeah.
able to look across, Sunday Swap, Min Swap, Wing Riders, Musi Swap, and get the best token prices because all of those dApps are on the same layer and they're somewhat connected in that sense because they all have that same foundation. But if we were to go and, have a different dApp be on a different L2 as opposed to another one, then there wouldn't be a way to have both of those speak, which I think is a huge piece of what we're here for within crypto, right? Which is interoperability. And then, as you mentioned, the solution to that would be to use bridges. But as we're all aware, those are pretty big security risks. And as of late, there hasn't been a lot of positive news. And so I would hope that we begin to see at least a little bit more maturity when it comes to bridges before we really begin to use those to kind of connect the gaps between different layer twos or different scaling solutions. That's going to bring us to the second point here, which I believe is going to be surrounding liquidity. So just like
Yeah.
with the siloed applications, right? We'll also have siloed liquidity. Do you mind maybe giving us your thoughts on the impact of, how liquidity will work and how it'll be impacted with layer two scaling solutions as they grow more and more in the space?
Yeah, absolutely. So a couple of things, and this liquidity consideration affects both the base layer. So we're going to use Ethereum because it's built around this conversation, but it impacts not only the layer two liquidity, but it also impacts the base layer's liquidity and the economic and the security model and the consensus model of both. So uh, let's start at the layer two. So a couple of things to consider. So the layer two is going to be centralized. It's not going to be decentralized. Most right now are centralized sequencers, which means that they're much like batchers on Sunday Swap. They take off chain the transactions, they put them into small packets, and then they bring them back on chain, and they're recorded hopefully correctly on the base layer. But right now there's no proof. There's no fraud proofs. And what fraud proofs are is that there's an algo on the base layer that says that this transaction was recorded properly on the ledger. So right now it's like, trust me, bro. It's like, you trust me, bro, that the sequencer, a centralized sequencer that has a multi-sig and may have 5 admin keys, didn't do something malicious, didn't front run a transaction, didn't reorder a transaction to get the maximum MEV, and then recorded it incorrectly on the base layer because there's no fraud proof. And just for folks on the call, on the show, MEV is the maximal extractable value. And think of it as these sequencers are able to, if they wanted to, because it's a centralized entity, reorder, front run, extract as much of the fees out of that transaction to the most benefit to them, not the user, and then record that on the ledger the way that they want it to be, not the way it should be. And the reason for that, again, is because of centralization. So, not without throwing stones, but Matic, for example, has, I believe, 7 admin keys, and 5 of them are owned by a single entity, Polygon Labs or something like that. So if we're trying to build a decentralized world, a decentralized financial system, but all our transactions are occurring on centralized L2s, then in essence, we've traded one bank and one payment processor like Visa for another. They're exactly the same. There's no difference. So back to your point, though, because I just went on a tangent and ran about centralization. Back to liquidity. Think of it on L2 that liquidity is what makes a market. right, on the base layer. And so if you're trying to do a swap and you're the buying or swapping using your USDC, again, we'll use BAT as the example, BAT, and there is not a deep liquidity pool for that pair, you're not going to get the best price for your swap. And so in essence, where you could have gotten 40 BAT for 10 USDC in an optimal world, in a perfect world, you only get 35. And the reason for that is the bid to ask is skewed because there isn't enough liquidity to facilitate your transaction at that exact price. And then the other thing about lack of liquidity in a system is that leads to these violent volatility prices. So after one transaction, suddenly the price of the asset will shoot up, and then once that transaction's gone down and someone tries to sell, it shoots back down. And so think someone bought back for, just say again in a hypothetical, 1.2 ETH. After that transaction, someone goes, oh, it's 1.2 ETH. I got to sell some and book some profit. And then when they go to sell, what they actually got was 0.99 was the equivalent transaction that they got. And so that volatility is because there isn't enough liquidity in the system to facilitate the transactions at a stable price. So there's that. Now, where I come in with the vampiric statement and the descriptor of vampiric descriptor is in one of the articles that you can pull up later, or we'll talk about later, Ethereum at the base layer economically was at a loss the last quarter, revenue wise. And the reason for that was that user activity at the base layer was shrinking because everyone was transacting on the layer 2. So in that situation, all the activity, all the economic activity is no longer on the base layer. It's all happening on L2. But nonetheless, consensus and the recording of the transactions on the base ledger still has to happen. And so what's happening is the ETH circulating supply is still increasing, it's still inflating, but at the same time, the economic activity is shrinking, which results in the fall of the ETH price, whereas the L2s reap the benefit of all that liquidity leaving to them. All the economic activity continues to increase or maintain on their L2s, and then they just use the base layer to record the transactions. And so again, that's one of those things where they're pulling everything away from the base layer. The base layer is accommodating that transaction, but then there's negative consequences. Like they still have to have validators. They still have an inflating Ethereum. And because of that, the price draws down. And on the decentralization security side of things, you know, when we talk about a proof of stake, and it's the value of the stake, right, that secures the network. Literally, the more expensive Ethereum is, the more secure Ethereum is. And so if the price of Ethereum goes down, then the security of that ecosystem goes down because it costs less to attack it because of the lower price in Ethereum. And so it's a negative cycle that it actually makes the base layer less secure. So
Thank you for that. This statement right here really stood out to me. So I do want to just go ahead and quickly read it out.
yeah,
It's
yeah,
literally opened up my eyes. So it reads here, while activity on the base layer is shrinking with no clear catalyst to alter the trajectory, a number of Ethereum layer 2 networks are maintaining healthy activity. So as you mentioned, right, the L2s in this particular case, they're thriving. You know, all these layer 2s that have come and built on top of Ethereum are doing quite well. But if they're now taking all the users and they're not giving anything back to the base layer 1, ultimately that's going to have an impact on the base layer 1, which the layer 2s need in order to survive. So for me, it's interesting to see, because it should be almost like a give and take relationship, right? But it
yeah,
seems almost as if right now there's just a lot of taking from the L2s on Ethereum and not much giving back into the L1. So reads
yeah,
here, Arbitrum and Optimism both maintain sequencer profitability, and while each has seen pullbacks in numbers of active addresses on the network, they remain close to yearly highs. So Arbitrum, Optimism, they've been getting a lot of chat about them. There's actually been, I think, one or two dApps from the Cardano ecosystem that have announced that they'll be reaching out and branching out to some of those layer 2 ecosystems. But again, not so much love for the ETH L1. And a lot of that, I think, is just due to the gas and just some of the things that were unforeseen during the early development stages of that particular network.
Yeah.
So let's go ahead.
I was going to say, and so really to expand it out, because right now, it's a dramatic example, but this is where it goes if the problem's not fixed. Is think of an animal and there's like, I don't know, leeches on it, right? And it's sucking the blood and the life out of the main animal, like the cow, right? And if you have enough leeches on it, sucking enough of the lifeblood out of it, then the animal is going to die, which then in turn kills the leeches. And so it's one of those systems where they're slowly, slowly, slowly killing off the base layer, which is critical for all of them to survive. And so until they figure out a way to fix that, that's the trajectory it's going on. So
Very well said. Let's take a couple of questions from the chat. They are building up. I was trying to hold off until the end, but there's just some of them here that we have to jump into. So we've got one surrounding the launch date for midnight. And so I know that there was a recent Cardano 360 episode. For anybody who is not aware of Cardano 360, they're basically interview segments put together by, I believe it's IOG, or maybe it's the Cardano Foundation, but they're monthly releases where we get to hear from some of the builders in the ecosystem. And so as a part of the most recent one, we did hear about some of the progress being made as it pertains to midnight. But as of right now, I don't think there's an actual date. Chris, have you actually heard of a date? Let me see here. I can pull up this article that we looked at earlier there. But it looks like they will be launching on the DevNet soon. So that's what it states there, if you guys can see right next to my cursor. But again, no official date. So Yohan, just wanted to quickly touch on your super chat, or on your regular chat, excuse me, that there's no official date yet, but hopefully begin to see one soon. I do want to give a quick shout out to Cardano for the 10 pound. Is that pound? Is that the pound sign right there? Okay,
yeah,
cool.
10 pounds. British
I want to say thank you for that, Cardano MM. Your support is always appreciated. One of the earliest supporters here on this channel, been over, I think, a year now. It's crazy how fast time flies. And again, just thank you for that super sticker. We've got another one coming in from Didi surrounding your background. So, Chris, you did give us a little bit surrounding your background. Do you mind maybe just quickly rehashing, your expertise, what you do formally, and then what you do within the crypto and blockchain space as well?
Yeah, absolutely. So a lot there. I've worn a number of different hats. So, um, as it pertains to this conversation, my background is I'm a pharmaceutical chemist by training. I've been involved in Bitcoin and the cryptocurrency space since 2010. A lot of my expertise and training is pretty much OJT, on the job training. So kind of taught myself, learned, and over the space of now 13 years of acquired skills and knowledge. I guess the Web3 way. You kind of teach yourself. The resources are there, and through iteration and making my own mistakes and whatnot, I've gotten to the point where I've gotten. And right now, I'm working with a couple of Cardano teams, and we're building out a platform that hopefully helps fund future projects. In my real life, I'm an executive in a Fortune 500 company, and in my day job, my fiat mind job, I run an organization that is very productive out here in my part of the world.
Yeah, thank you for that summarization. And I also want to say thank you for your service. You mentioned serving earlier, and that is always appreciated. I think for me, it really adds to the perspective that you bring, because again, you are multifaceted. You're running companies outside of crypto, and you're bringing some of that expertise into this particular space. Again, shout out to Chris for joining us as a part of today's live stream. If you guys are not already following him on Twitter, I'll go and leave the link to his Twitter down below as a part of today's video description. Again, just taking a look at some of his recent posts, as you guys can see, very technical, a lot of charts, and a lot of just the facts and updates surrounding development here going on in Cardano. So if you guys have not already given his Twitter a look, I definitely recommend you guys go ahead and do so. He's been one that I've been following here very closely, and again, using some of his input is as content here on my channel as well. So again, thank you for everything that you're doing for the space, Chris. We've got one more comment that I want to go ahead and just quickly take here. Roki, you did not miss the pop quiz. I'm actually going to be having a follow-up live stream here with Trim and Josh from Lake M Crypto. That's when we're going to be having the quiz section. This was just going to be focusing on the L2s. And because this is Chris's first appearance here on the live stream, we're going to kind of figure out a content cadence and then just kind of get an idea of some of the topics that we want to kind of bring a little bit more regularly to you guys. But if you guys would like a quiz section as a part of these live streams as well, I'm more than happy to put them together. And so Chris and I will chat offline here surrounding, how much he can contribute to this and how much I can contribute to this. And then as we go along, we'll introduce more segments and different topics as a part of these live streams. So let's jump back into our conversation surrounding the third piece when it comes to what you've noticed within the Ethereum ecosystem, which I believe is going to be touching on onboarding and some of the friction that can just come with layer ones and layer twos, right? So I know right now, for example, just in the Cardano ecosystem, right, when you're onboarded, you've got to create your wallet. There's like 10 or 15 different wallet providers. You have to kind of understand staking and all these different things that are a little bit nuanced if you're coming from a non-technical background, right? And obviously that's who we need to be onboarding in order for this space to really grow. We're going to be the mom and pops, the people that aren't necessarily so close to the ground, but that still want to get an exposure to this. And so when we introduce layer two scaling solutions on top of everything that we already have, right, that only kind of muddies the water, because not only do you have to understand how the layer one works, you now have to understand, the layer two, the security, the consensus, and the infrastructure of that. And on top of that, the actual ecosystem that is built on the layer two specifically. So what are your thoughts surrounding that third point when it comes to onboarding and, that potentially being an issue when it comes to layer two scaling solutions?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's critical. Right now, it's just not up to par. The question you have to ask yourself is, would your grandparent be able to transact on an L2 without issue or without frustration? Or more, appropriately, because this is meant to be a global movement, again, with someone on a smartphone in a less developed part of the world who has limited exposure to technology, would they understand what to do? Would they understand to follow the steps to transact whatever way they wanted to on an L2? And so I'll use a brief example is GMX is the decentralized exchange trading platform on Arbitrum. And so you can connect with your MetaMask. And there's a lot of liquidity on GMX, so it's a good platform to transact, and there's leverage trading, all of that. Now, even for someone like myself that's been in this space 13 years, it is the first couple times it was not easy to convert or send my USDC that was on the Ethereum chain into the Arbitrum chain through my MetaMask, then be able to then connect to GMX on the Arbitrum, and then be able to transact my USDC that was now moved from my Ethereum to my Arbitrum chain within my MetaMask. And this was me doing it for the first time on my desktop with a large screen, and it still took me, I don't know, 10 minutes to figure it out. And I'm pretty nimble and agile when it comes to using this stuff. Now, put my 80-year-old dad in front of the screen and ask him to do the same thing, the computer's going out the window minute 2, done. So we're not there yet. We're not there on usability. It literally has to be as user-friendly as if you're logging in onto your Chase account through your smartphone and you're sending or Venmoing someone some money on the other end, or you're going onto your Amazon app, you're buying, a book, and it's as easy as pressing a couple buttons. And that's what we need to get to, the point where we can just press a couple buttons, or it's very intuitive user interface that someone that has limited exposure to technology can interact and have a successful outcome. And we're not there yet, but we will be. But I think right now it's just getting everything working properly. And the other thing, and I want to throw it in here for the sake, in case I think it's very important because it does go to liveliness and usability and UX and customer experience, in that liveliness of a chain. And so I'm sure you guys noticed base layer went down not too long ago for a few hours. Arbitrum's gone down a couple times. So has Optimism. All these layer twos. Polygon historically has a record of going down. And the reason for that is because of the centralization of their sequencers. They may have, some of these chains only have one centralized sole sequencer. I would speculate that Base has one centralized sequencer with a few admin keys. And so, for whatever reason, maybe the interns spilled the coffee on the computer, that sequencer goes down. And what happens? The chain stops. The chain stops until they get that sequencer back up. And so, if we are trying to compete with Visa and the PayPal's of the world, and we can't keep our network up and running 24/7, 365 days, 5, 7 years straight, then we can't compete just from a reliability standpoint. And this is where I'll throw back plug in for Cardano. The whole time that we've been on the mainnet, we have continued to produce block after block after block for now, better part of 6, nearly 7 years. And when the network was attacked, it still continued to produce blocks, and it self-healed within minutes, like a cyborg. It repaired itself without need of a human intervention within minutes, but it kept going, and it's kept producing blocks. And that's the magic of Cardano. And that is what the L2s right now in this version of them do not have.
Wonderfully stated when it comes to Cardano's uptime. I recently released a video, I think it was a couple of months back when we hit like a milestone. And I was highly impressed to see that we've been up, I think it's like 5,000 plus days or something like that. As you mentioned, 5 to 6 years without ever going down, which is a huge testament to the stability and the SPOs backing this chain, right? And the decentralization. I think that's one thing that people tend to forget sometimes is we might not be the fastest chain right now, right? But that's why we're having this conversation is surrounding the L2s and what we can do to better improve the speed and the scalability of the chain. But even in its early stages, we're really on a really good trajectory, being up without any downtime for 5 plus years. Now, something that you mentioned there earlier when you were talking about onboarding and just the friction side of things, I think right now we're like in the early stages of where the internet was back in the early 2000s. Now, granted, I was, a young boy back then, going into my teens, but I'm sure that you can probably greatly recall, looking at websites back in the day, right? No
Mhm.
interactivity, super flat, not a lot of information. And then looking at websites and applications nowadays where you can have your grandpa go ahead, sign up for Wix, and then create their own website in a matter of, 1 to 2 hours, right? So we've come a long way when it comes to um, adoption and I think iterations, on things just like the internet. And I think it's going to be exactly the same with blockchain and crypto, where right now we're like in the early 2000s of the internet, where the only people that really understand this are the people that are super passionate about it. But as time goes on, we're going to see more and more of the general populace come into the space, not necessarily having to understand all of the stuff at the bottom because there's going to be so many layers that have been abstracted out of it, right? To where they're able to just jump right in and utilize things that are built on top of Web3 and on top of blockchains without having to understand all of the underlying infrastructure. So my hope is that we get there sooner rather than later. But I think that that's the way that we're in now, and that obviously the space is filled with a lot of early adopters, including people like yourself who've been in this space since I believe early 2010. So again, to close out that point, I think abstraction will be key. Simple user interfaces, like we've already seen with some of the biggest apps on Cardano, which I always like to highlight MinSwap, but I think that's really been the key to their success, right? Has been how simple the application is to use. I think the simpler, the easier it is for people to be able to understand it. Therefore, the easier it is to onboard people into that particular dApp. So, Chris, we are coming up at just about an hour. As I mentioned, I do have another live stream coming up here in just a little bit. So I do want to take a little bit of time to prep for that. But let's go ahead and just close this out with a last round of comments here. We've got a couple actually coming directly towards you, which I kind of want to get your thoughts on as well. So we've got Peepo who's asking if you're a billionaire after you gave us some of your background there. I'm not sure if Chris wants to disclose that, but if he's been in crypto since 2010, I'm sure that he's doing quite well. What are our thoughts here surrounding Dex Hunter? So Chris, I'll maybe pivot this over to you and I'll give my 2 cents. But for anybody who's not aware, DexHunter is going to be a DEX aggregator building on Cardano. They just struck a pretty big partnership with the SNEC team. And this is developed by Nmelon or Nikita, who also developed the Jungle platform, right, which is an analytics platform. And so what they've now done is they've kind of rebranded, shifted away from what they used to do, and they're now focusing on DEX aggregation with a lot of really cool features, which also has really kind of raised my eyebrow. One of the features is related to their hunt token. So if you hold a certain amount of their hunt token, you can actually increase the speed at which your transactions are executed, which I think is a really cool value proposition. Right? Obviously, if you're in the DEX space and you're trying to make trades, the speed at which the trades happen, I think, is one of the key pieces there. So I think they look very promising. They are on beta right now. I believe the official beta link is on their Twitter, but I think it's a very valid product. They're obviously trying to jump into the new trend, right? We've already seen MusiSwap also announce their aggregator. We're waiting on Genius Yield, who's also going to be doing their own aggregator. And I think there's a few other platforms as well that are looking at DEX aggregators as well. But Chris, do you have any thoughts surrounding DEX Hunter?
No, that's a new project. I'll definitely do some research on it. I'm just like very excited of all the different projects that are launching. I think we're really accelerating forward, and so I can't speak specifically to that project. I'm sure they're a great team, but yeah, it just goes to show, every day there's more projects launching, and I'm just excited for everything in general.
Yeah, over 1,200 builders right now, and I believe we're nearing about 1 to 200 projects launched on the network. Moving into the next comment, this is coming in from Roki. Dap Central or Chris, have either of you read Web3, which I guess is a book that was just released? Thoughts? If so, I personally have not. Chris, have you?
I have not, but it will be on my list to read. I love to read, especially about this space. So thank you for that. I will definitely look into it.
Thank you, Roki. Huge supporter here on the channel. Moving on to the next one, coming in from Didi. Did you ever make profit following any YouTube technical analyst? If so, let us know. I personally have not. I try to always make up my own decision. I will say one technical analyst that I watch, and probably a lot of people within the Cardano community watch, is going to be Dan. And so I think he gives a really good macro outlook. And so I don't necessarily watch the technical videos to find out when to make a trade or not. I usually watch it to get a better perspective of like the broader picture. And so I think Dan does a really good job of providing us the macro outlook. And then Jason Pizzino as well. Now he focuses on Bitcoin, generally speaking, but I find that both of them bring a lot of really good TA skills. Who do you potentially watch there when it comes to analysts, Chris?
Yeah. So I do like Dan a lot. I think Dan is very even and fair. He looks at the situation both ways. But much like yourself, any TA analyst that I do follow, I don't really do it to do any trades or anything, but more to understand where we are in a cycle, or more to understand just where things are going, and kind of just from a historical standpoint where we are relative to every 4 year cycle, which I am a believer in. I think crypto right now, because of the volatility, and I don't think it'll be like this forever. There is a huge mental aspect to this, and an emotional management aspect to this. A lot of people are very vested in the space, and so someone like Dan, what Dan's great for is to, I think, give reassurance and peace to some folks as we navigate volatile times, because technical analysis at the end of the day is human emotion on paper or on a screen. And so Dan does a great job of verbalizing that. And so, what is the kind of the general group emotion at the time, and that helps you form your rational thoughts and help you navigate your emotions as we go from one event or another. And so, some they're like big signs. It's like in the bull market, and everyone's euphoric, and the chart is nearly vertical. That's a sign. That's a sign for maybe it's time for you to take some stuff off the table. And the reverse is, it is not going to fall forever, because at some point it's going to have to turn back around. And so it's just really in general terms, everything has a purpose.
Well said. Well said. We're going to go ahead and just keep on moving. There's more and more comments coming in now. So we're going to pick up the pace and then we're going to go ahead and shut this thing down. Didi, you're right. We do have another live stream. I'll be back on again, like I said, with Josh and Trim in just about 2 hours from right now. So make sure to tune in for that as well. We'll be talking about project updates. We'll be jumping into Project Catalyst and just so many other things going on in the ecosystem. And that's actually one of the things that I did want to get your thoughts on, Chris. Maybe we save that for the next live stream.
Sure.
But there's been a lot of opinionated comments when it comes to
Mm,
Project Catalyst. And so I think that in itself could be an entire live stream when we talk about, recent funding round 10, some of
yeah.
the different things that we can do better, right? And some of the things that have worked well. And so I think there's been a general negative consensus surrounding it, but I think it's always good to, in retrospect, also highlight what was done well, right? Because Catalyst
Yeah.
is not a failure. But I think as of late, there's just been a really big negative sentiment, which I
Yeah.
also obviously want to jump into as well. So let's maybe put that on the agenda for the next one.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
awesome, awesome. We did touch on this comment here already. Let's see. There's another one coming directly at you from Peepo surrounding sharding. What does Chris O think about sharding? Charles said it will be easy on Cardano. Any thoughts here?
Yeah, I think sharding makes perfect sense on Cardano. And if you're thinking of it in a certain way, input endorsers is a kind of form of sharding. Um, if you kind of broaden the definition of sharding, I think you could put input endorsers in there or squeeze it in there. But more specifically to what most folks think of sharding, absolutely makes, I think, extended UTXO and how Cardano at the base layer is constructed would be a very viable and doable thing.
Awesome. Thank you there. Moving right along. We've got another comment from Peepo, 2100 days. I believe this was in reference to the uptime that we were
Yeah.
discussing there earlier. Another comment from Didi. Tim has a lot of YouTube videos to educate on blockchain and game theory. I think education is key in this space. So the more content, the better. I think it's just a matter of making sure that you really connect and that you understand where the content creation is coming from, right? Some people, I think, in this space do kind of prey on people. But I also want to say that, on the other end of the spectrum, there's a lot of really great content creators, even outside of the Cardano ecosystem, that I also like to jump in and kind of hear their thoughts as well.
Yeah.
Another comment here. Sorry, go ahead. Did you want to say something?
I was just going to say, absolutely. I think there's some great content out there, but like everything in life, you kind of have to vet the motivations of folks that create content. What is their purpose? Is their purpose to educate, or is there a purpose to monetize? And from there, you can make your decisions and on how you absorb that content. But agreed, content is great.
Well said. Well said. Moving on to Roki. It feels like it's 1990s hip hop era for crypto. So many thoroughbred flavors before that institutional vanilla and mayo smother. I agree. We're still very early, so pack your bags right now. Obviously, not financial advice, but do your due diligence, and this, I think, an opportunity that we're going to look back on in a couple of years and just be really thankful that we stuck it out, even in the throes of the bear like this right now. And so, any thoughts that you want to add there before we go and just touch on the last final comments here, Chris?
No, I think that, yeah, I think you summed that up nicely. Yeah, we're very early, and the main thing is, you know, things happen fast in crypto, but they also happen slow. So patience is key.
And you're speaking that from experience. You've been here in multiple markets, right? So this is not your first bear, and it
Yeah,
definitely wasn't your first bull back in 2021. So again, it's always really awesome for me to talk to people that have been in this space so much longer than myself and to hear their perspectives as well. We've
yeah.
got another comment here coming in from Carlo. Cardano is like a self-healing cyborg. You might have to go ahead and what is the word that I'm looking for here?
Trademark,
There you go.
trademark.
You might have to go and trademark
Yeah,
that one. It's got a ring to it. Let's see here. We're getting a couple last comments. Looks like Didi's going to be tuning out. And I think that's going to go ahead and just do it there for us. Let's go ahead and just wrap this up.
great.
Again, guys, we wanted to just bring this up to you guys to chat a little bit about L2 scaling. Chris, any final thoughts before we close the stream out?
No, just love and thankful for the community. Everyone keep their chins up, and the builders are doing fantastic work, and anything we can do to support them in the background, I'm sure they greatly appreciate it. So keep up all the good work, everybody.
Alrighty, you heard it there from the man himself, Chris O. Again, give him a follow on Twitter if you guys have not already. You'll definitely be seeing more of him here on the channel as we continue to broaden both of our horizons, right? Him jumping into the YouTube scene and then myself trying to take some tips as to how to better grow within the Twitter space. That said, ladies and gentlemen, if you guys appreciated today's video, as always, I would appreciate you if you could tap that like button. If it's your first time stopping by Dapp Central, where we cover all of the latest news here going on in Cardano, I would appreciate you if you consider subscribing. And last but not least, if you guys have any comments here following the live stream, then as always, make sure to go ahead and leave them down in the comment section below. That said, and as always, we'll see you guys in the next video. Take care, everybody.